Just a real quick summary of the first two classes. We talked about, first of all, where should a child go? It's to be conformed to the image or the demut of Yeshua, which basically is to allow Yahweh to write the story. And those of you who heard the tape, you know what I'm saying there. And then we talked about authority and control and being in submission to control and authority. And your child is to be submitted to Yahweh through you as a child and then to Yahweh directly as an adult. And it's kind of interesting. You ever notice that God has commandments to us that we are to follow him, but he never commands the children to follow him directly. He commands them to follow us. And a good example is the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1. What does he say? Be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. And that's really the way it should be with our kids. So it's, if we're not following, if we're not under authority, then how can they be under authority? So it's first on us. So that's God's design, is for us to be under his authority and then the children to be under our authority. And then when they get promoted, when they leave home, then they go directly under Yahweh, and unfortunately you're out of the picture. Other than you become advisory, and you have every right to speak your mind and advise, but it's up to them at that point. We talked about training and control and how you can't train unless you have control, and we talked about in the real world, be it military or on the job, when you go into a training program, during the time you're there, they control you. And if they don't have control, then the training class just kind of falls apart, doesn't it? Because you got people wandering around, people talking, and they can't train, so they have to have control. And so you can't train without control. So it's very important. We talked about how that ties in with the commandment to honor your father and mother and all that. I might add to that just a little bit, and we spoke on this, just touched on this a little bit, but the idea of delegation, of authority, when you delegate something to your child, I wanted to bring out that ideally what that should be is you start with the younger child and you may start delegating a chore. That chore might just be cleaning up their room or whatever. At this point, what you have, you kind of have a situation like this, and this is control here. So at the younger age, your child is operating in here. You have a tremendous amount of control still. The whole thing is by the time that child leaves home, or out here, this is the leaves home line, you should be delegating more and more and more and more and more and more authority to the point where that child, by the time they're ready to leave home, is operating under 100% total delegated control. Now, again, ultimate control remains with the one doing the delegating. So until they actually leave home, you still are in actual control. So even though they may be totally running their life, you have every right to intervene and say, no, sorry, she does it all the time. She's on Megan all the time. No, you are not going to wear that. We talked about free will, and we finished up last week basically saying don't get between God and your child. Even though you're operating in this situation, you still have to understand that God is still dealing with your child. Sometimes he will do it directly, sometimes through you. But you got to be sensitive to that. And if God wants to deal with your child directly, then you got to be able to get out of the way. I'll be talking a little more about that as we go along. Just remember, if God had wanted your child to be forced, he could have done it himself. He could have made us robots. But he didn't. Art Williams wrote a book once. It was on insurance and all that. So it doesn't have anything to do with the class, but I really like the title of his book. And we got to remember this. And the title of the book is a really long title. The title is this: all you can do is all you can do, but all you can do is enough. And that's really important to know. As long as you've done everything you can do, that child graduates, they leave home, you can't sit around beating yourself up about it. Again, when his two kids misbehaved, you didn't see God sitting around going, oh, where did I mess up? Maybe I should have done this. I told them not to eat that fruit. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. Maybe you don't see God doing that, do you? God did what he needed to do, and then it was free will on their part, and when they messed up, it was their problem. So God didn't feel it was his fault when his children went bad, and neither should you. God is not going to blame you for your child's choices, and neither should you. God only holds you responsible for the training. That's what you got to do. You do the training. And then you hope that it's enough. But whatever it is, it's enough. I look at it this way. Our job as parents is to make sure that our children, when growing, do not have any excuses for their behavior. And I think our kids will always have some excuses. They're always going to be able to come back in one place or another somewhere along the line and say, you didn't tell me. I just want to communicate enough to my kids so that at least they won't be able to come back when they mess it up and they go, yeah, well, you didn't tell us. And we'll say, yeah, sorry. Yeah, you were told, and you chose to go the other way. Okay, and we talked about negative choices bringing cursings, positive choices bringing blessing. I heard a story a few years back, and they told a story about this school district, and I don't remember which one it was, but they'd come up with this fantastic new way to teach reading, a great reading program. And they had put it into practice. They were getting great results from it. Kids were learning to read, scores were going up. It was just fantastic. And this reading professor at one of the Ivy League schools that's big in reading, a well-published guy, heard about it, and he made arrangements to go to that district and spend a day and go through and look at this reading program in action, which he did. And afterwards, at the end of school, he got together with all the instructors and everybody involved with the reading program, and they're discussing it. And he was telling them, how impressed he was and how it was just awesome. And it was great, and he was very impressed with the results they were getting. And then he said, but only one thing bothers me. And they said, what's that? He says, does it work in theory? What? Who cares? But that's a true story. That actually happened. This joker actually asked that question, does it work in theory? Now, that didn't have a whole lot to do with what I'm talking about, other than to point out that theory and real life situations are sometimes not always the same. And so what I've been talking about the first 2 weeks is a lot of theory. And the reason I say it's theory is because I'm talking about parents who are 100% totally under the authority of God, and children who are 100% totally under the authority of God through their parents. How many of you know that doesn't happen? That's theory. There's not a parent out there that meets that condition, and there's not a child that meets that condition. I don't know about in your family, but every now and then one of our kids will just rub us the wrong way, and we lose it. You understand you're not operating under the authority of Yahweh at that point? So to say you're 100% under the authority of Yahweh, you just blew it. You'll never be able to say that. All you do is blow it one time, and that's out the window. So most of us are operating down in that 80, 90 range, And our kids are operating probably lower than that. We might think so. So it's like, it's great theory, and it's a great goal to shoot for, and you need to keep that out there and say, this is what we need to be doing. But understand that reaching that goal, it's not going to happen. It's just not. You want to come as close to it as you can, but don't hold that as the expectation that you have to meet. It's an ideal thing, and we need to know it. We need to keep it out there. What I'm going to be doing now, let me draw a map up here. When the Grahams get ready to come from their house to this building, sometimes what we do is we live on a street called Dartmouth, and we'll go down Dartmouth to Santa Fe, take Santa Fe up to I-25, take I-25 up to 84th, and we come over 84th, and then we go up to Washington, over to 88th, and then we turn on Pose, and bingo, there we are. Sometimes we do that. There are other times that, especially if we think that the interstate is slower than the side roads, that we will take Dartmouth over, and we kind of make a little jig over here, and we end up on a street called Sheridan. We take Sheridan all the way up to I-76, and then we bring I-76 across, and we catch I-25, and then it's in that way. Sometimes we will end up over here on a little side road going up here, and we come all the way across on, it'd be like 84th, so we come in like that. So there's like 3 different ways that we can use to get here. Point is, it isn't the route we use to get there. What's important is that, right? How we get here isn't really of any great importance. One way may be quicker than another. One may be more efficient than another. One may be shorter than another. But you've lived in Denver, all of you, long enough to know that there are times when we can go this way and get here in 30 minutes, where if we were to take the interstate, it could take an hour. Now, if we're talking about 2 o'clock in the morning, this is always the better way, isn't it? But at rush hour, generally this way is the better way. But do we know that when we leave the house? No, we take our best shot. Is it possible on a given day we might take this route and it turns out that the interstate was just wide open and we could have got here in a lot less time? Sure. Do we know that in advance? No. We just know that, for instance, on Monday nights, that generally this is not a good way to go. So we go this other way. But we don't know in advance which route is actually going to end up being the best route tonight. And just because it's the best route tonight, say this Monday night, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the best route next Monday night, or that it was the best route last Monday night. Does everybody understand that? And you lived in Denver, you know how that works. All it takes is one accident somewhere, and that's it. It was no longer the best route. The same thing, I think, comes when you're raising kids. The route you take to get there is really not all that important, but the destination is. And this is in reference to these parents, and we all know it. We got parents getting divorced. And what are they getting divorced over? Because they're fighting. And what are they fighting over? Well, Papa wants to raise the kids this way. He disciplines them this way. And Mama, she does it a different way. And so they get into big fights over how to raise the kids. They end up getting divorced. That is about as stupid as getting divorced over which way the paper comes off the toilet roll. Because here's the deal. In my family, she's 180 degrees out of phase with me. She does not raise our kids the way I would do it. We just disagree right down the line almost on everything. And you go, but your kids have turned out so great. How did you do that? And I will tell you this, we've never really argued that much over that. Let me give you an idea of where we differ. I remember back when Travis was like 5, 6 years old. Had we looked over, been sitting in the park, we look over, and there's Travis up in a tree. This is Edie. Travis, you get down out of that tree right now before you hurt yourself. And if he doesn't do it, he's in trouble. My approach is more along the lines of leaning over to her and looking at her and saying, dear, look at that. Now, how long do you think it's going to be before that idiot falls out of that tree and breaks his arm? My mother always had a saying. Of course, she said, how do you teach a child not to touch a hot stove? My mother said, get him a stool. So that's kind of more the approach. That also, by the way, is the approach that Kevin Leeming uses. He's strong on what's called reality discipline. Just get out of the way and let them fall down the stairs once. They won't do that again. Or you can beat yourself to death screaming and hollering at them. Which ways are the better way? Well, I don't know. One of those ways is one route, and one of the ways is another route. And which one is it today? I don't know. See, it doesn't matter. But what's important, and what I think parents have to agree on, is this. Train up a child in what? The way he should go. You better be pretty well connected on what that is. What's the way that he should go? Where is the ultimate goal? Now, whether that happens dad's way or mom's way, in the final analysis at the end, isn't really important. And so here's kind of my theory on that. Basically, our kids have been raised pretty much her way. I just stay out of the way and let Mama do it. Unless she says, Ken, get up here. Talk to your kids. Okay, unless she does that, I just stay downstairs at my office and I just do my stuff and just let her do it her way because I don't agree with the way she's doing it. I would not do it that way. Now, why do I do that? Well, any child growing up, which parent really is the parent that really does most of the raising when they're like young? It's the mother, isn't it? And psychologists will tell you kids relate better to mom at those younger ages than they do dad. So it makes sense that mom should let's just let Papa back out of the way and let Mama do it. Because even though Papa may be going this way and Mama's going this way, it doesn't really matter because we're both going the same direction. And the amazing thing is, keep in mind all kids are different. But in spite of that fact, she's done a pretty good job with our kids. I think our kids are pretty much on target of getting to where I would want them to go, and because where I want them to go is the same place she wants them to go. We don't really have any debates over that. We never debate the goal. We seem to track pretty good on that. But we're not going to get into arguments over strategy and the methods. Now, one of the things we're running into now, and this happens with boys at about the age of Travis begin to kind of gravitate towards dad. So we're in a situation where we're having to transition from mom to dad. And dad's having to learn how to do this because dad doesn't really know how to do this because dad's never really had to do this before. And I'll be real honest, I don't think I'm doing a real terrifically good job at this, okay? So it's just one of those things that has to happen with boys. I think girls can kind of start out with mom and they can end with mom. Boys need to start out with mom, but at some point, around that bar mitzvah age, they need to kind of transition to dad. Right now, it's not easy on Travis. It's not easy on me because he's trying to transition to me, and I don't know how to do this. That's more of the practical stuff. I have not been there, done that. Now, I know what needs to be done. I understand the theory. Great. But when it comes down where the rubber meets the road, that's something different. But I understand this. All I can do is do the best I can do. I just do the best I can do, and that's going to have to be enough. That's just going to have to be enough. The other thing I want you to keep in mind on this, the world is full of evidence of kids that grew up in pastors' homes who are now out in the world doing everything that the world has to offer. And at the same time, you have kids who grew up in alcoholics and drug abuse homes and child abuse and you name it, and they're now pastoring churches. So go figure. My point here is don't get too hung up on the route. Make sure you're focused on the goal and that you're in agreement there. In other words, although I have a difficult time supporting her sometimes in the methods she uses, I don't have any problem supporting her on where she's going. And our kids know one thing, that mom and dad, when it comes to where they're supposed to be going and what they're supposed to be doing, we're in agreement. Are they aware of the fact that mom and dad don't agree on the method to get there? Oh, yeah. You know what else they understand? They are in deep, deep stuff if they try and exploit that. She'll be all over them like white on rice if they try and exploit those differences to their own advantage. And don't you think for 2 seconds kids won't do that. When Megan was 5 years old, she was an expert at that. Nobody could do it better than her. She did. We would actually figure out, she'd be playing us one against the other, and we wouldn't even figure it out until 3 weeks down the road. She had it all figured out at 5 years old. Mom and dad are like floating through life. We don't quite get what's going on. All of a sudden it wakes up, what is going on here? And we realize that she's got us going against each other. So I don't think there's any problem with being different on the route. I don't think there's any problem with your kids knowing that. In fact, one of the little things, I'll just insert this right here, that we really believe in and have done with our kids is total openness with our kids. We don't hide anything from them. Katie asked the other day, when did we first know we were adopted? Well, same time we did. If we know it, they know it. I just don't think it's right to be hiding things from your kids. That will come back to bite you. One of the ways that'll come back is kids will reach a point at some point in their life as they get a little older when all of a sudden they realize you haven't been totally truthful with them and you lose credibility real fast. And then you find yourself saying, how do I communicate to my children? Well, if you've lost credibility with them, you definitely won't. So you want to protect your credibility. That's why, and I know this doesn't happen in this community, but how many of you know these parents that bring up their kids thinking there's a Santa Claus? How many of you know that kids get really devastated when all of a sudden they find out that there's no Santa Claus? Do you realize they're not upset at the fact that there's no Santa Claus? That's not why they're so psychologically affected. Why do you think they're so psychologically devastated when they find out there's no Santa Claus? Yeah, mom and dad lied to me. It's that loss of credibility with the people who are in authority over them that just totally wipes them out. Santa Claus can be there or not be there. But mom lied to me, dad lied to me. That just absolutely devastates them because now they start to wonder, now what else is not true? They tell me this, can I believe it? For a kid 5 or 6 years old, 7, 8, 9 years, that's devastating. That is absolutely devastating. You don't want to do that. So one of the things we've always done has been totally transparent, and if we disagree on things here, our kids know it, for the most part. It's not that we sit them down and say, okay, kids, Mom and Dad disagree on this. We don't do that. It's just we don't try and hide it from them. We don't go around trying to put on airs and pretend like we agree on something when we don't. If we disagree, we disagree. Now, this is just us. You may do differently. I'm just talking about us now. You have to figure out what you're going to do in your family. You hear people say, if you're going to have an argument, you need to do that out of the view of the kids. We have our debates right in front of them, so they know. If you're going to get into a knockdown drag out, send them to grandma's and then beat each other up, all right? There's a difference between a fight and a debate and a discussion, you know what I'm saying? So as long as you're discussing and you're debating things, we don't seem to have a problem doing that right in front of the kids. They know exactly what's going on, what's coming down. If Mom and Dad disagree, then Mom and Dad disagree. And what does that teach them?
How to work things out.
Yeah. See, when they get married, are my daughters going to get into a marriage situation where they feel like there's somehow something wrong with them if they don't agree with their husband 100% of the time? Not my girls. I hope they have a very understanding husband, because my girls understand one thing. Mama don't have to agree with Dad all the time. And my boy understands that he doesn't have to agree with his wife all the time. But you do need to agree on this. Does everybody understand that? As long as you agree on the goal, it's not real important the path you take to get there. And since people's personalities are different and everything, and everybody's going to do things differently, somebody needs to do that. I got into a discussion just Saturday with a guy who says, yeah, but you're the head of the home. You decide what it is, and your wife needs to submit to you. She does. See, I delegated that authority to her. You train the kids your way. I've decided that that's the way it's going to be. How do you like the way that works? Now, I want to talk about that part of the verse now. Where should a child go? And I want to talk about 3 traditional views that I've heard throughout the years of growing up. You've probably heard them too. And I want to look at each one of them a little bit in detail. I'm going to call them spiritual, emotional, and career views to that where should a child go part. The spiritual is the one you normally hear if you've been around church a lot. This is the one you hear a lot. This is kind of the way people look at it. And this is, well, where should a child go? Well, here's where he should go. You need to raise your child, so church is a big thing to him. Make sure he's in church every time the door is open. Make sure that child's involved in church activities. Make sure that child's involved in Bible study and devotion. Focus on character development and morals. Strict discipline. You know those people? Spare not the rod, so help me God. On that area, let me talk about a little problem here. Strict discipline alone does not produce control, because outward appearances don't always talk about. See, if you're in true control of your child, it's an inward thing. You've all heard the story about the little boy that his mom kept telling him to sit down. He didn't sit down. Finally, she just made him sit down, and he made the statement, well, I'm sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside. Well, that's rebellion, folks. You don't have control there. It may look like you're in control, but you're totally out of control. So don't confuse outside behavior with control. Proverbs 23:6 says, my son, give me thine heart and let thine eyes observe my ways. In other words, if you don't have the heart of your child, then true control is impossible. You may have the appearances of it, but you don't have it. And God help you when that kid turns 13, 14 years old. Okay, you got 13, 14-year-olds, especially guys, and nowadays even girls. 13, 14, 15-year-olds will actually take up their fist and hit their mother so hard it knocks her right backward on her rear end. And then they turn around and do what they want to do. And what are you supposed to do then? See, if you haven't had control up to that point, you need God's help. When I say God help you, I mean that. And one of the things you got to remember is God is the perfect example of the perfect parent. Look at the way he treats us as his children. Every time you step out of line, is God right there to pound you? He's not, is he? Treat your children the same way. You don't have to nail them every single time they do something wrong. First of all, it'll wear you out. Exercise a little mercy. Sometimes just step out of the way. The laws of gravity will teach valuable lessons that you can never teach. That's the spiritual thing. It's just raise them in the Bible, raise them in church, just teach them how to live a spiritual life. That's one. The other one is this approach. You raise them according to this is the emotional thing. You got to be sensitive to your child's temperament. How many of you have heard these words? Sanguine, choleric, melancholy, phlegmatic. You ever heard that? Interesting thing about that is that particular approach of those four words actually has its basis in paganism. Let's look at it another way. Is your child outgoing or shy? Is he a talker or a listener? Is he independent or dependent? Is he a leader or a follower? Now, we can all look at our kids and kind of peg them in all those areas, right? Is it important to know those things about your kids? Yes. But watch this. There's a trap you got to be really aware of. So you begin to sense that you got a boy or looking like maybe he could be a preacher. So say, okay, I'm going to kind of direct him that way. Why do we think this boy should be a preacher? Well, because he's a very outgoing, he's very talkative, he's very independent, he's a leader type person. It says pastor all over it, right? Do you know what those traits tend to produce, especially in a male? Pride. Yeah, little boys are that way, tend to be very prideful. In order to be used by God, God's going to have to break him. It doesn't mean they can't be used, but God will have to break that person first. On the other hand, some of the best pastors out there, where do they find their strength? They find it in their shyness, their ability to listen and not talk, in their dependence on God, not independence, and their ability to follow, not lead. You've got to be able to follow God. That strong leader type tends to not want to follow God too much. You understand? That independent personality finds it difficult to be dependent on God. So which of those types make the best pastor? Both. God uses both kinds. Now, the first kind, he's got to make some adjustments first before they can really be used. Got to do the same thing with the other kind because he's got to kind of get them to be a little more like the other one and exercise some of those things. But those second traits breeds humility more than pride. But both types are used. So my point is can you use those things to help you train the child in the way he should go? We'll just put that on hold for a minute, along with the spiritual one. But in that light, I want to finish up with a verse. Now, sometimes God doesn't see things the way we do. We see our kids and we say, oh, they got these their personality types. That's where they're going to go. Watch how God tends to go the other way. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 to 29. He says, for ye see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised God hath chosen. And things which are not to bring to naught things that are. Why? So that no flesh should glory in his presence. So if you're focused on these personality traits, and that's your focus, you run a great risk of missing where God wants to go with that child. Because God's probably going exactly 180 degrees out of phase with where you're at. Is it nice to know those things? Oh, yeah. Absolutely. You need to know those things. It's nice to know those things about your kids so you know where they're at. But don't focus on those things. Don't use those things as the means of figuring out where that child should go. Because chances are God's going to be going just exactly, you're going this way and he's going that way. And then now you're in opposition there. So you need to know these things, but don't focus on them. Then you have the third one, the career. This says you need to focus on your kids' abilities, aptitudes, and talents. How many of you have heard this? If God gave you a talent, he didn't give it to you to just sit on, right? He gave it to you to use. That's an indication of where God wants you to go. That's the career method. Now, is it important to know what your kids' abilities, aptitudes, and talents are? Absolutely. But again, if that's your focus, if you're going to base the goal on those things, chances are you're going to miss it because God's going the other way. Not guaranteed, but he might be. So you don't want to be focused on those things. Now, let me talk about one thing in reference to those three methods. Which one do we use? If you had to pick one, which one are you going to use? Let me give you an example from reading. We had a friend of ours that was a Spanish speaker, and he had some kids that were having a great difficulty trying to learn to read. And we were over at his house one day, and he pulls out this box that's hooked on phonics. And he wanted me to look at it and see, what do you think of this? And, I'd never seen hooked on phonics before, so I looked at it pretty close, and I said, well, it looks pretty good. I said, personally, we got the phonics game for our kids, because we're big on phonics too, and so we got the phonics game. So whether you get the phonics game or hooked on phonics, they're both great for teaching phonics. He said, oh, well, good. I'm glad to see I'm going the right direction. I said, well, I don't know whether you're going the right direction or not. I said, do you have any books around here written in Spanish? He said, yeah. I said, go get me one. So he went and got me this book. I opened it up, took the first paragraph, and I read it to him. And I said, now, did you understand what I just read? And he said, yeah. I said, that's good, because I didn't understand any of it. Because I don't know Spanish. But I know things about Spanish. Okay? I know that two L's are not pronounced like an L. It's pronounced like a ya. Those beasties running around out there are not llamas, they're llamas. I've had students in my classes that when I call the roll, I say Padilla, not Padilla. I was listening on the news the other day, and they were talking about this guy named Padilla. I understand some of the phonics of Spanish, and using phonics, I can read Spanish good enough that somebody listening to me say, oh, you're not a bad reader. You can read. You're a reader. Now, am I a Spanish reader? No. Because reading is the process of bringing comprehension and understanding off of the page. And when I read Spanish, I don't get any comprehension or any understanding. So I do not read Spanish. I can pronounce the words so that a Spanish speaker would think I was reading, but I'm not reading. So what's missing? Well, unfortunately, you need that other stuff that they used to focus a lot on in the public schools called whole language. You need those skills to learn to read. In fact, they've now discovered, and this is what they're now teaching in school. They're teaching our new teachers coming out, you need it all. You need phonics, you need whole language, and if you can think of anything else, you need that too. You need whatever's out there in order to teach your kid how to read. But if you're going to get hung up on phonics, and you say, phonics is it, whole language out, you end up with kids that know how to pronounce the words, but they don't know how to bring meaning to it. If you just teach whole language and you don't teach phonics, what do you end up with? Kids that are great with contextual clues and things like that, but if they come to a word they don't know, they can't sound it out. So they're at a disadvantage. You see, to really do it right, we need it all. So in these three areas, is the spiritual thing important? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, everything you've heard about that, it works. Use it. How about that emotional stuff? Looking at where they're shy or where they're talkers. Is that stuff important? Oh, absolutely. It needs to go along with the other. And how about noticing their talents and abilities and all that? Oh, yeah. So you're going to get good clues from all of that. Okay? So you need the spiritual, you need the emotional, you need the career. And if you can think of anything else, you need that too. You need it all. The more tools you got on your tool belt, the better chance your kids have of getting to that goal. So you can read all the books, you can use all that stuff. You got a brain too. You come up with something that works with your kids just because it wasn't in some book somewhere or somebody didn't talk about it. That doesn't mean you can't use it. My theory is, if it works, use it. If it doesn't work, abandon it and go off to something else. Those three areas, we need everything in there. Let's look real quick at the latter part of that verse. Train up a child in the way he should go, and then what's it say? And when he is old, he'll not depart from it. I grew up in churches where the pastors couldn't read simple English. And we come from the Baptist church where they're really big on the KJV version of the Bible. You know, it is the preserved Word of God. It is as inspired as the original text. Any of those other versions are not versions, they're perversions created by Satan to lure the children of God away from the truth. Well, assuming that's true, let's just grant that for a moment. Let's just say that is the truth. What difference does it make if you can't read the English? If you can't read first and second grade English and bring understanding to it, then what? So what? So you got the ultimate translation. It's a big deal. Let's look at that verse just real quick here. Y'all understand that if I said to Tony, you got to get out of the state of Mississippi. Tony's going to look at me and go, huh? How can I leave Mississippi when I'm not even in Mississippi? In other words, you can't depart from some place where you're not. Is that just good common sense? Now let's look at the tail end of that verse with that in mind. It says, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it. Well, if he's old and he's not going to depart from it, that means that up to that point he has what? Not departed from it. I don't know if you've heard this, but I grew up in churches where this was taught. It's a great thing. Mom and dad do the best they can. Kids graduate, they're out there, they get married, they got kids, and they are totally in the world. Not only do they not want to go to church, they come around mom and dad, you don't even dare talk about spiritual things. And then they say, well, I'm not too worried because I have the promise of God that that child will return. What verse are you basing that on? Well, it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. When he's old. No, dear. The verse says he will not depart from it. It doesn't say that when he's old, he'll return to it. There's a difference. So what's the correct way to read this verse? It's probably a little better translated. Train up a child in the way he should go, and as he is growing old, he will not depart. If you look at that verse and read it in just a simple English, it means what? If you train up a child in the way he should go, there will never be a time when he will depart. From what? The way he should go. He'll always be going towards that goal. He's not ever going to turn from that. So now it becomes important to understand, what is that goal? What is the goal? Because if we're focused on the wrong goal, the child may depart from it. And so we got a lot of kids who have departed, but they haven't departed from the goal. We think they've departed because we never understood what the goal was. So that's very important to understand. We've talked theoretically about some important things about what it takes to get to that goal. And so now we're going to be going through talking about, okay, what is that goal? And I want to remind you one thing. Remember free will? Because of free will, that verse is not 100% guaranteed. Do you understand that? That child's free will can get in there and mess it up. Ask God. He knows. He had 2 kids that did it. So when it says, as your child's growing old, he will not depart, that's not 100% guarantee. Because you still have that free will. I always want to keep bringing you back to that. Free will is there. That's the downside to it. Now, is free will bad? Well, I don't necessarily like the alternative. The alternative would be I'd be a robot. See? So free will actually is a pretty good thing. But it's like all coins, it has 2 sides. Free will just simply means when you get verses like this, you've got to remember they're not 100% guarantees. But if you don't bring up a child in the way he should go, you almost got 100% guarantee of the other side. He will depart. So you don't have a guarantee of yes and no. What you got is a guarantee of no and a guarantee of maybe. And if you've done it right, it's a pretty strong maybe. 98% chance, but it's not 100. So consequently, your child can still go bad. And if that happens, remember, it's not your fault. You can't take credit for your child's failures. When your child goes out there and does a bang-up job and does it great, you can't take credit for that either. It's not your fault. You simply trained. So remember how that works. Remember the words that are worse than swear words. There are words that successful people never say. There's one word. Successful people in life, Christian or otherwise, they just never say this word. It's not part of their vocabulary. You have people out in the world that'll use all the swear words there are, from dang to the F word. And they'll use them liberally. And they're very successful. But there is a word you will not hear them say. The interesting thing is, we will ban those bad words from our kids' vocabulary, and we let them walk around the house saying the word that a successful person would never let come out of their mouth. We'll let them say that word all day long. What's the word? Good. Can't. I can't. I can't. I can't. I'm going to end with a little story. We've kind of laxed up on our kids. There's a lot more can't going around our house than there really should be. But boy, when we first got our kids, there was no can't. So one day, Mama sent Megan and I to the store to get a couple gallons of milk. And so we went, and of course the milk's always at the back, and we got our 2 gallons of milk. And she's like about 5 years old. She's only about this tall. And I'm walking, starting down the aisle with my 2 gallons of milk, and little Megan looks at me and says, I sure am glad you're carrying those because I couldn't do it. Anybody care to guess what the people in that store saw about 4 seconds later? This little 5-year-old girl dragging these things on the floor up the aisle, and people looking at me like I was cruel. And then I look at her and said, sweetheart, you don't want to let them touch the floor because you drag them on the floor like that, you're going to wear a hole in the bottom before you get up there, and all the milk's going to be all over the place, and then you're going to have to buy some more milk to replace it. So she got them up, and then we got up the checkout, and I said, okay, put them up on the thing. Well, she had to set one down, get a hold of one. She set them. With great difficulty, she finally got them both up there. Well, what did she learn with that? Well, she just learned she was wrong. She could do it. She could. Here's the hard part, and I'll admit, I do a lousy job at this. But the first thing you want to do when something like that happens, you've got to ask yourself, is it possible for the child to do that? If it is, take control. Make them do it. And then once you take that tack, don't give in. You can't let them win that battle. If you don't want to do battle right then don't make it an issue, but you can't let them get away with it all the time. So is it possible? As far as the word can't, first thing you got to do is remove it from your vocabulary, then remove it from the child's vocabulary. And understand it's always just not the word can't. My Megan didn't say, I can't do that. She says, I'm glad you're carrying those because I couldn't. Same word, just a little different form. Same thing. And right there at that point, I said, nope, that isn't going to work. We're not going to go there. We're not going to do the can't thing. If you're going to eliminate all those swear words from your kids' vocabulary, don't forget to apply the soap with the can't too. Because can't will do more damage to your kids than saying those swear words ever will. And the absolute proof is we got tons of successful people again out there who swear a blue streak, but they're highly successful. But you'll never hear them say can't. That word just is not in the vocabulary. So just add one more word to your list of dirty words and put it right at the top. It is the dirtiest of all because it will shut them down. It'll do them more damage than saying those swear words. It'll absolutely shut them down. Mr. Ford, who created the automobile, had a saying. He said there's 2 kinds of people in the world, those that say I can and those that say I can't. And they're both right. The ones that go around saying I can, they end up being can-do type people. Those that walk around all the time saying I can't, they can't. It will be the self-fulfilling prophecy. So take that swear word and get rid of it out of your kids' vocabulary. But the hard part is you got to get rid of it out of yours because then they're going to look at you and say, "What you say it?" And that's the hard part for me is getting it out of my vocabulary. It's way in my vocabulary, way too much. Actually, it's probably in my kids' vocabulary less than it is mine. I got to work to bring myself up to where they're at. And that's totally backwards, isn't it? But unfortunately, in my case, it's probably true. Okay, any questions or anything up to this point? Because that's all I'm going to do today.